14 Bannerman Road is where Sarah Jane Smith lives.
And 14 Bannerman Road is the name of my podcast about it. This time, The Empty Planet, Parts 1 and 2, written by Gareth Roberts of Trickster Episodes Plus, Secrets of the Stars, and Revenge of the Selene fame, and directed once again by Ashley Way. Part 1 was first broadcast on the 1st of November 2010, Part 2 was first broadcast on the 2nd of November 2010, and that means that once more, if you're listening to this on the date of intended upload, then Part 1 turns 11 years old today. I don't think I said it for the first episode of the series, but it's true of all of them, as they were shown weekly, much like this podcast is. So we do our 13 Bannerman Road, and then we go straight into titles with no cold open. The sound even overlaps a bit, and we see that lovely old CGI of Earth. Don't know how many times we've seen it now, but they're getting their money's worth. It's accompanied by the assorted noises of humanity, and then we head down into the attic, where the noise is actually coming from Mr. Smith as he scans through all the electronic communications, radios, phones, etc., trying to locate an alien energy source that appeared for one tiny little moment and then disappeared again. And while this is a bit weird, Sarah Jane sends Clyde and Ronnie home because they've got school tomorrow. She says, "If I need you, I'll shout." She's got a red top and a pinstripe waistcoat on, looking stylish as she often does. Not all the time, but 99% of the time she looks very stylish. She's a little bit agitated at not knowing what the energy source was yet. There's a nice little scene of Ronnie lending Clyde a CD or something, talking about needing to finish a book for school tomorrow. Clyde says that he hasn't started it, but if he reads the back cover, page 73 in the last chapter, he'll get the gist. Just a bit of banter between them. He mentions he'll see Ronnie at school if they're not invaded by tomorrow. And this is the sort of stuff where Ronnie is like, oh, he's immature, he didn't impress me, but kind of thinks it's a bit cute, you know, that's sort of like, oh yeah, they got a tiny little crush on him. She goes upstairs to finish the book. Haresh wants to catch up because he hasn't seen her all day. He mentions that he read the book when he was younger too. It's Great Expectations, I think. He's trying to connect with her. She appreciates that, but she kind of chucks him out because Dad, I've really got to finish this book for tomorrow. We see Clyde at home, not reading the book, though he tells his mum that he has, but instead he's drawing a Shansheath. Clyde, you did not learn your lesson from the Mona Lisa episode. Sarah Jane would be very unimpressed. Clyde's mum is very proud of his talent, though. There's a sweet moment between them. We cut back to Rani, who's going to sleep now. She seems to check her phone before bed. Interestingly, seems to be a lot chunkier than the phone that she had in the Nightmare Man. So, minus points for continuity there, though it literally doesn't matter at all. It's entirely me being picky. Or maybe she smashed that phone off camera and it's explained in some kind of supplementary bit of media, and I'm the one who's wrong. Who knows? Back out to CGI Earth, all the noise of humanity there, and then it suddenly stops. Morning time. Rani wakes up, puts the radio on, just static. Gets up, calls out for her parents. No one in the house. She goes around checking the rooms. Can't find him, no Gita, no Haresh. You never realise how much background music there is till it's gone, but it's eerily quiet here, and I quite enjoy this kind of unnerving vibe. Ronnie becomes a little more panicked. She runs out into the silent 13 Bannerman Road. I mean, you can literally just hear the wind blowing and that's it. And then some slightly sinister background music kicks in. She goes over to 13 Bannerman Road, she knocks on the door, she gets no reply. She picks up the spare key, and I take back what I said about Clyde's art, because Sarah Jane wouldn't have a leg to stand on. She never learns. She leaves this house that is full of alien tech so insecure. I swear, if UNIT found out how easily it could all be nicked, they'd consider it grounds to come in and lock it all in the Black Archive. Ronnie runs into the attic, can't find Sarah Jane anywhere, calls out, "Mr. Smith, I need you." Don't think we had one of them in a little while. But Mr. Smith is actually open, but blank. She tries to phone Clyde, but her phone's got no signal. She grabs Sarah Jane's Sonic lipstick, which is just sort of out on the side, and then runs off down the street, calling out, seeing if anyone at all will respond. She sees Mrs. Fraser's door is open, just a neighbour down the street. Runs inside her house. There's still cups and plates on the table. It's as if everyone has suddenly vanished in the middle of whatever they were doing. Now, I actually do remember this one pretty well. I know why they've gone, but you can imagine that seeing this for the first time, this is actually really cool. I can put myself back in those shoes with about as much clue as Ronnie about what's currently happening. Very intriguing, bit creepy. A dog runs by with its leash trailing, confirming that the animals haven't gone, it's just humans and Zylock, because Mr. Smith has also gone. We don't really get much explanation for that, but I guess he's just gone as well. Ronnie heads back to her house, goes through the TV channels, all of them showing static. There's a sudden knock on her door that makes her jump, and she approaches it cautiously, holding the TV remote as if it's a weapon. She opens the door. The background music does that sort of single note that rises up very high for tension, just sort of. And it's Clyde. Immediate embrace. They tell each other about what they've seen, or rather haven't seen. Everyone's gone. They say what they've done. Ronnie informs Clyde about Mrs. Smith. Clyde says that he went round to Finney's house. Was Finney mentioned in the Odd Bob episode? I feel like we've heard of Finney before. Finney wasn't there. He's tried calling Luke. He's tried calling 999. He's tried calling 112. He tried calling Ronnie before realizing that he had no signal. 3 points to make here. He didn't realize that he had no signal after the first call. Okay. Second point, I've learned that the UK uses 112 alongside 999. I looked that up. It's true. Didn't know that. 3, Clyde says he mentions everybody that he called, but he says, Ronnie, I tried to call you first. Like, he lists her last, but then makes the point to tell her, I actually tried to call you first. Ronnie gives a tiny little smile when she hears that, and it's quite cute. So Clyde suggests, okay, everyone around us has disappeared, but we don't know that everyone has disappeared. Maybe it's just in a limited radius. But Ronnie says, well, there's no TV, there's no phones, there's no internet, there's no radio. And Clyde says, okay, so maybe something's blocking the signal to us. Maybe we're just sort of isolated now in a little bubble. Ronnie rebuffs this by switching the TV channel and telling Clyde to really listen. It's silent, and Clyde says that it's freaking him out. And I have to confess that I've genuinely got no idea what's happening here. We were going really well up to this point, but I'm just confused by this behaviour. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. Anyway, they decide to go into town to see if they can find anyone. We get a shot of London with the Gherkin in view, and then we pull back and we see that it's Clyde and Ronnie looking down over London from the top of a multi-storey car park, concluding that maybe everyone actually has gone and it's just them. They mention that whatever Mr. Smith picked up last night must be related to it. Clyde says that his mum was talking to him, but he wasn't actually looking at her, and then she just suddenly stopped and he looked up and she wasn't there. And Ronnie says, well, if everyone suddenly disappeared like that, where are all the crash cars? Where are the crash planes? We're near Heathrow Airport. What's happened? I like the mystery. We actually see down the street all the cars. There's just the ones that are parked on the side of the road are there, but there's none actually in the road itself, none down the middle. So they just walk straight down the middle of the road because it's completely clear. Clyde says that he's hungry. He hasn't had any breakfast. I don't think Ronnie's had any breakfast either. So they pop into a cafe. I'm not sure if Clyde cooks the food or if he just finds it there before anyone managed to tuck into it. But he says he left some money for when the people come back. And I think, oh, that's optimistic of him. And then he follows it up with, if they come back. Over their breakfast, they try and think like Sarah Jane. I like that we kind of see her tutelage and her training come into play. They try and figure out why aliens would either want them or not want them. What is it that makes them different from everyone else? Ronnie says that the only thing she can think of is that they both know Sarah Jane. So Clyde wonders how long it would take to get to Oxford to see if Luke is around, and they debate whether he'd already be making his way to them, or if he'd be waiting for them to come to him, or if they're even on the right train of thought at all. Clyde says that if they're all alone, then they're kind of like Adam and Eve, and Ronnie agrees till she realizes the implications of that and goes, no, actually. And it's the kind of flirting where it's like neither can admit that they're into each other, so they just kind of dance around the subject like, wouldn't it be weird if this happened? But it won't, because it's not like I like you or anything. It kind of fits for a very teenage way of flirting. They decide to head back to the attic, and they're walking there when a crate from a market stall is knocked over. They try searching for whoever knocked this crate over, and see a shop door close, and they pursue, seeing another door inside the shop close. They're always just a little bit too late to make out who or what it is. Outside the shop, they see a couple of bikes have been chained up, so Ronnie unlocks the chains with the lipstick. Clyde says it's stealing. Ronnie says, hey, we'll bring them back. I'm unsure if they do. We don't see a scene of them bringing them back, but we don't see anything that specifically says they didn't bring them back. But, you know. So they cycle along till they see an abandoned kid's bike. They look around, they see a kid with curly brown hair looking at them from the window of a block of flats. Once he sees them notice him, he's off running again. They alight the stairs, they see him head into presumably his flat and lock the door. Ronnie sonics it, in they go, finding him cowering behind a wardrobe in his bedroom. He tells them to get away. He asks if they're the ones that made everyone disappear. He is very fear and a lot of questions. Ronnie introduces herself and Clyde. He says that he's called Gavin, and she goes off to make some tea, leaving Clyde to explain. Probably figuring that he'll bond better with a boy, because she apologizes for being a girl in his bedroom. He's in school uniform. He looks like a young teen. Kind of just looks like all the gang in Series 1. Clyde finds a picture of who he assumes are his parents, but Gavin says that they're his aunt and uncle, because his mum died when he was little, and his dad left. Clyde says, hey, I know what that's like. Gavin says that when his aunt vanished this morning, he went into town looking for people, much like Clyde and Ronnie did, and he asks how they got in through the door. So, Ronnie explains the sonic lipstick. She demonstrates it by making the light in his room rotate. Rotation is an interesting choice, but sure, I would have thought they'd be making it light up. But no, it just makes this light spin around. And she says it's alien technology, and he freaks out, and she tries to explain, hey, well, no, we're not aliens. We've just met aliens before, and Clyde wonders why she's so happy to divulge all of this to a kid that they've just met. Ronnie says, hey, he needs to be caught up to speed so we can figure all this out. What luck is it that the only other person that they know still left on Earth was very local, right? Why was that? What does he know? Now, I thought, I can never remember there being an explanation for this, and it kind of gets worse when you realise that there is just because right now there could be an explanation and we're waiting for it to come along. It just never comes along. It's just a huge, massive coincidence that this kid happens to be in broadly the same area as Clyde and Ronnie are. Like, if that wasn't the case, the entire world would be doomed, as we find out. Okay, it's just a really big coincidence in this episode. Kind of don't like it, but you can kind of put it to one side, and if you don't think about it, the story's pretty good. So, you know, there's a very loud trumpet kind of sound outside, and what seems like engines. They make the whole room vibrate, and Clyde and Ronnie both look out the window, and Gavin takes the opportunity to flee. When Clyde and Ronnie head back outside, they see his bike is gone, theirs is still there, and they hear another loud trumpet noise, so they cycle back to the high street where it seems to be coming from. It's interesting, they managed to shut down this whole high street to use as a set. It's very neat. It's a real high street, it looks good, all abandoned and weird. There's a bit of a metallic stomping sound, it's a bit Cyberman-like, actually. Clyde wonders if Gavin is a normal kid, because he said there's nothing in his flat to indicate that a kid lives there. And Ronnie says, oh, well, okay, he might live a bit of a rubbish life where he doesn't really have many possessions of his own. And we're immediately jumping to the conclusion that he's an alien, are we? There's a bit of a falling out as Clyde says, well, maybe we should go with my idea because I'm more experienced in these things. I've known Sarah Jane for longer. They head back to the cafe. Ronnie mocks it a bit, calling it HQ and implying that Clyde is sort of in charge, but as a bit of a military leader. He apologizes. Ronnie wonders again why it's them. Why is it the two nosy kids who aren't an ex-doctor's companion or a genius or a supercomputer or a robot? And she wonders if they should have just walked away from it all and if that would have been better than being stuck here now with no idea where Gavin is, no idea what the noise is, no plan on what to do. Clyde wonders if they would have been mates or not at school if not for all the Sarah Jane stuff. They think about it. They conclude that they love this life. And sure, they don't know what to do right now, but they prefer it to whatever their normal adolescence would have been. Suddenly, on the TV in the cafe, a red triangle with some unrecognizable symbols over it. It's also on Clyde's weirdly oval-shaped phone. He's got a bizarre phone. And on Ronnie's phone too. There's a noise, like very garbled speech, and they head outside to try and hear it better. In the TV shop, which is just like nearby, there's this triangle message on every screen. What is it? What does it mean? And this is sort of what I mean about just having the good sci-fi stories. This is what this series is about. I like what's going on here. It's the kind of thing where this, like, oh, wake up one day, everyone on Earth has disappeared, suddenly you've got a message, what does the message mean? Like, that's a really, really good premise. And it's the sort of thing that I imagine a lot of people my age watch as a kid. And because this story really stuck with me, I really remember this one. And I imagine they're in university now, like people kind of my age, possibly going on to be planning to write for Doctor Who or something. You know, it's the kind of thing that inspires you because it's just a really cool story. Clyde runs more towards the noise, and Riley's following along, but she thinks that she sees Gavin up an alley, and so she heads up there, splitting them up. Clyde sees the reflection of a big yellow thing in a shop window, and so he goes and hides behind a car. Rani gets to the end of the alley, and she turns around to see a big red thing stomping towards her. Now, this episode came out in 2010, and in 2010 on CBBC, there was a program called Mission 2110 that featured large robots, broadly humanoid, with a single red eye in either a red or a yellow colour scheme. Now, I was watching both shows at the same time, and back in 2010, so I blended both robot designs in my head. And so seeing these robots in Sarah Jane Adventures now, they're different to what I remember. They're a bit skinnier, but the relatively vague description that I've given here remains true. They are humanoid, they have a single red eye, they have a red or a yellow colour scheme, and it's just funny, these two shows that are out at the same time came up with different robots that do look kind of similar. Also, I'm not the only one to spot this. Someone on the TARDIS wiki wrote it under the info for this episode too. So, yeah, not the same robots, but coincidentally, rather similar. Also, I learned that Mission 2110 was created to replace Raven, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. Like the challenge. Again, anyway, I'm going off now about other CBBC shows from back a decade plus ago. So, both robots catch up to their respective cast members. The other one catches up to Clyde, red for Rani. They lift their hand, pointing a finger at them, which contains another red light. It's aimed a bit like a weapon. Both Clyde and Rani lift their hands in surrender. We see what Yellow sees of Clyde. Sort of, we see first-person view from the Yellow robot's perspective. He sees Clyde's face in kind of inverted colours, and then a readout with symbols like those that are on the TVs. Clyde thinks it's going to shoot him, so he just kind of goes, "Don't, please," and we roll credits on part one. I gotta say, Sarah Jane Adventures, pretty good at its cliffhangers, I'll give you that. Though, then they play the next time bit right after, so it kind of betrays that they get away somehow, so I'd have preferred it if they didn't have that actually. I wonder if it's on the DVD versions, as opposed to these totally nice, good versions that I'm watching that aren't ripped off the TV and have been circling the net for 10 years. Interesting point, the CBBC logo on the version I'm watching isn't in the corner, but it's kind of squished over a bit. And a friend of the podcast suggested that it's because it was filmed in 16:9, but if people were watching on 4:3 TVs, it might have cut the sides off, so they wanted to keep the logo there. And I used to have a 4:3 TV, and I remember watching the episode and thinking that in my head the logo was always in the corner, so I'm not sure if I'm remembering correctly or if this rings true. But maybe when I originally saw these episodes, I wasn't seeing the sides. Maybe they were cut off. I don't know. No idea if it's true, but it's a pretty good theory. Anyway, I just want part two right now. I remember the story, but I want to know how they get out of it. So let's get into it. We do our part two. We have our 13 Bannerman Road. We have our previously on. We have our titles. You know it. You know to expect it. Then Gavin pops out from behind a big metal drum type of thing, shoves it into the red robot, and allows Ronnie to follow him, running off back down the alley as the robot pushes it out of the way and regains its balance. The yellow robot kind of just stops and shakes its head. Maybe somehow linked to the red robot? Not really sure. But Clyde takes that moment to run away. We see robot vision again as it stomps after him. Clyde runs into a shop. He hops up next to the mannequins, pretending to be one as the robot stomps his way in, and is apparently unable to distinguish between plastic and actual human people, so leaves them all be. I've literally just written for a note, something something autons. I've written the words something something autons. The robot concludes he's not in there, the robot leaves, and Clyde sneaks out and bumps into Ronnie and Gavin. And they quickly establish that they've seen robots, but different ones. Clyde congratulates Gavin for saving Ronnie before Gavin spots the message on the TVs in that TV shop. He says he's got no idea what it is. He says he's happy to stick with Clyde and Ronnie now because they're more normal than whatever is going on here. And he's like, so we're going to head in the opposite direction and we're going to get away from the robots, yeah? When Clyde and Ronnie explain that they're going to follow the robots to try and figure out what the message means, he's a little bit nervous, but then he sort of cracks a joke saying, yeah, alright, I'll tag along, you might need saving again. Turns out they can't find where the robots went, so they go back to the cafe, which Ronnie now genuinely calls HQ, which is quite sweet. And I see that, okay, a lot of location filming out in the street, we still have like 4 sets maximum. I have 4 kind of, like, they're not sets, they're not built up, they're actual genuine locations. It's a genuine cafe. But we kind of, like, we got out on the street, we got in the cafe, and we've got, like, Gavin's flat and the attic. Like, that's it. And we just swap between them all. It's kind of cute. Clyde represents the robots with ketchup and mustard bottles, which I kind of like. They're still trying to figure out what sets them and only them apart. It can't be time travel, because Sarah Jane's time traveled as well. Gavin is very taken aback that they even consider time travel. He's like, I'm just a random schoolboy. I have very little idea of what's going on here. Clyde finally twigs they were grounded by the Jadoon. We get a flashback to when it happened. It didn't happen to Luke, it didn't happen to Sarah Jane. It explains why they'd be left behind. Doesn't really explain Gavin, but they're like, okay, well, sure, we'll figure out Gavin in a bit. He's just very baffled in the background. We see a flashback of them getting grounded, and I think to myself, wow, this show uses flashbacks way more than I remembered. Now, the thing is, I imagine if these robots want to come and kidnap everyone on Earth, they probably wouldn't much care for if some people were grounded, because they're already committing a crime. And if it's the simple act of making a grounded person travel off planet, if that alerts the Jadoon and they wanted to stay under the radar, why weren't Jadoon alerted when Clyde was on the Crimson Wasteland in the last episode? So it makes a little less sense than the episode implies it does. The only way that I can explain it is if the robots are nice and they know that the Jadoon get trigger happy, and so even though it wouldn't really have been Clyde and Ronnie's fault that they were kidnapped, the robots don't want to anger the Jadoon at all. They want to play it safe and make sure that Clyde and Ronnie don't get shot for breaking any rules, even if they broke them involuntarily. So maybe it's just a hint that these robots are quite nice after all. We'll see. I can't remember if I cracked the thing that set them apart was that they were grounded when I watched it 11 years ago, by the way. I imagine I didn't, because I'm often quite late to catching twists and things. So it's just a neat little moment. But Gavin is still like, hey, well, what about me? I've never met a Jadoon. I'm your standard unremarkable 13-year-old kid. And then Clyde says, well, him sticking with us is probably pretty dangerous then. Because if we weren't grounded, then we'd have been kidnapped along with the rest of humanity. So the robots are probably coming after us to round us up. On cue, the robots smash through the cafe window, because we gotta have a nice bit of drama. Clyde, Ronnie, and Gavin escape through the back of the cafe, with Ronnie unlocking the door with the lipstick and then turning around, locking it again. They tell Gavin to run away. Gavin, this isn't your fight. Just get out of here, hide somewhere. He does. The door doesn't hold for long, so Clyde gives Ronnie a kiss on the cheek. Ooh la la. Dating, a slow burn, etc., etc. And then he runs, I guess, hoping to lead the bots away, but the bots split up, one going after him, one going after Ronnie again. It's the red one that pursues Clyde this time, with Yellow losing track of Ronnie as she hides from it in a bin. Clyde comes up against a dead end, and the red robot catches up to him. It extends its hand again, it uses a light in its finger to scan his face, rather than to shoot. Ronnie goes back to the cafe. The food in the back of the cafe is half prepared, and you have to applaud the little details like that. It's still, everyone's just up and left suddenly in the middle of doing whatever they were doing. So you got all the little hints of that. Yellow catches up to her in the cafe, though. It scans her too. Fearing for her life, she says that Clyde never let her down, which is something that he apologised for before he kissed her on the cheek. Red just nods and shakes his head at Clyde. Clyde says he doesn't know what it's trying to convey. Yellow points to the message on the cafe TV. Clyde tries to walk away and is followed by Red. I imagine it thinks that he's leading it somewhere. We see Gavin back at his flat growing a backpack, and with the message on his TV there because it's on every screen. Clyde heads back to the cafe, teams up with Ronnie again. Ronnie tries to introduce herself to the robots. They repeat Ronnie back to her, but then they also seem to assume that Clyde is called Ronnie, and they just repeat Ronnie a lot. Clyde grabs a newspaper and shows it to them, hoping that they can assimilate the language that way. I quite like that they have issues with translation. It is so often swept under the rug. that I like it being a point in this episode. Somehow, reading means that they also know how the words sound, so they can understand when Clyde and Ronnie speak. But hey, they're robots. We'll chalk that bit up to sci-fi. Ronnie asks them to translate the message for them, and it turns into a countdown with 23 minutes on it. When Ronnie asks 23 minutes to what, they reply, give us air. We see that Gavin has got on his bike and he's cycling off somewhere. Clyde asks where everyone is, and they say warp shunt. Their very robotic voices are a bit hard to make out, but they say something about being suspended. They confirm that everyone is alive in a sub-dimension, and then they request the air again. They say, give us air, or the warp shunt closes and the humans do not return. So, that's the countdown till the warp shunt closes. They have 20 minutes to comply. Give us air. Give us the sun. Give us the sun as well? Oh, you want the sun as well? Give us the sun and air. Not S-U-N and A-I-R, but S-O-N and H-E-I-R. That's a neat little bit of linguistic trickery there. I like that little coincidence with the language. It's not too far-fetched either, is it? You think if a robot comes down demanding the sun and the air, then they want to take the resources from your planet, but no, they want the sun and air. That's a moment that I think is always going to stick in my mind till the day I die. It's pretty great. It's kind of cheesy, but it's kind of great. It's very Doctor Who, that kind of the line between cheesy and brilliant. Clyde says, well, hey, if you want Prince Charles, you can take him. They probably already have, but Ronnie suggests it must be Gavin. What if, when Gavin's dad left, he left to go back to his planet? It's worth a shot. Now, where has Gavin gone? The robots confirm the king is dead, the king's brother is dead, so they've come for the sun and air. He is the only one who can give the order to actually return humanity back to Earth. They say this information was sent to him, which Ronnie twigs was the energy trace last night, but never got to him. As far as he's concerned, he's just a normal kid. Okay, so 20 minutes to find him, they run off to his flat. He's not there. 15 minutes to go, we see him sitting under a tree looking at a picture of his mum, while Clyde and Ronnie try and figure out where he's gone. Where would he feel safe? They find his diary. 11 minutes to go. He mentions the Circle, the fictional Ealing Circle Nature Reserve. It's 5 minutes away. One of the few things in Gavin's room is some kind of nature poster, so it's the best chance they've got. Off they run, robots in tow. They catch up with Gavin. They try and explain that the robots want him to be their king because his dad was an alien. The robots seem like they can't see Gavin at all. 3 minutes to go. He says he doesn't know anything about all this. He says that his mum said she'd tell him about his dad when he was older, but she died before she could. He says his mum gave him a ring, we see he's wearing it, said it was from his dad, so Clyde and Ronnie say that he can save everyone if he takes the ring off. He does. The robots scan him. They confirm him to be the sun and air. They say that there was a biodampener that was shielding him, which is a device that Sarah Jane suggested Martin Truman was wearing before it was found out that it was actually the ancient lights inside him that were unable to be scanned or whatever. But Sarah Jane suggested, oh, maybe he's wearing a biodamper that's hiding his alien nature. Turns out Gavin actually is here. Gavin is an alien prince. He was put on Earth to live with his mum as a human. Now it's time for him to go back. Clyde tells the robots to send the info again. Maybe he'll be able to pick it up now that he's not shielded. The red one raises his hand, points his finger, and we zoom in through Gavin's eye out to a purple, faraway planet where 3 humanoid alien children are in a field. There's a large other planet visible in the sky. There's a shining city with spires in the background. CGI budget this series, man. Gavin decides that he's happy to return. He wants to go and rule this paradise rather than staying here in a flat with an aunt and uncle who don't much care for him. I do like that Ronnie was right. He didn't have much stuff because he was basically living as a human with an unfulfilling life. It wasn't because he was an alien, though he is an alien. Also, he's kind of 13. I don't know how old he is in alien years, but he's basically a 13-year-old kid. He's been raised as a 13-year-old kid. He seems to have the maturity of a 13-year-old kid. So, of course you'd make the choice to be king of the aliens. I mean, come on. But, I mean, it's his choice to make. So, you better confirm it quick, because the warp shunt is only good for another 1 minute 15. Gavin commands that red and yellow take him home, and that also they return the humans. He says, Clyde, I now pronounce you Lord Clyde, Rani, you're Lady Rani, and then they teleport away. 35 seconds to go. Clyde and Ronnie run out into the street to see if everyone is back. 10 seconds to go. They wonder if it was too late. They wonder if it didn't work, if it broke, what's going to happen. Suddenly, a car almost runs over Clyde. Everyone is back. The countdown hits 0. The day is saved. I do like that. It's just all of a sudden, bam, everyone's back. Cars just, all the cars that were taken away that were driving in the middle of the road, suddenly back, about to run you over, get out the road. It's just so sudden. Everyone's back. Barely even knowing what was going on, barely knowing that they were gone until they look at their clock and see that an hour and a half has suddenly passed and they've got no memory of it. I gotta say that I think I liked the mystery of part 1 better than the solution of part 2, but it was still pretty sweet. I like that it wasn't hostile, it was just folk coming to find their king. Now, there is a bit of a dark implication that the king was maybe hiding his son from a war. Like, son, I want you to not live life as an alien, like, live with your mum on Earth, just live there, and, get away from it all. I don't even want you to know about being a human. We'll tell you about that, about being an alien. We'll tell you about that when you're older. But for now, get away from it all. I must go back to my planet. I must rule. Oh, I've died in this war. Oh, my brother has also died in this war. We are without a royal family now. Now the robots have to come back and take you back to rule this war-torn planet. I mean, that's just a theory that I've got in my mind. There's no suggestion of that actually in the show. But, I mean, there is the counter-argument to it that the robots showed him his planet, and his planet looked like paradise. It didn't look war-torn at all. And if they were tricking him to show him, oh, come back to this paradise, and then when he gets there it actually is war-torn, well, then they'd know it would be a stupid idea to have a king rule it, surely, because they'd have to try and trick him to come back. And then why would they do that at all? Why wouldn't they just select someone else? But then you think, well, their programming was very strict. We know that they needed Gavin specifically to give the order to return humanity. So, maybe they know it's a terrible idea. They know they're all going to die when they come back and they have a 13 having to rule this world when it's at war with either itself or another planet or whatever. But that's what they have to do. All the massive load of speculation, crazy theory, might not be true at all, but I like that it also might be. Anyway, we've still got 6 more minutes of this episode, so let's see how this conclusion goes. Clyde and Rani hug in celebration as everyone appears to be going about their normal lives. We cut back to Rani's house. Haresh is on the phone to Geeta, saying that if she's not back in 10 minutes, then they'll phone the police, before Rani comes through the door and gives Haresh a big hug. Haresh is like, hey, an hour and a half just vanished. It was 7 a.m. All of a sudden, it was 8:30 a.m. We've had a really weird day, and then suddenly we couldn't find you? What happened? Rani, do you know about this? Was it anything to do with you? Where were you? So many weird things keep happening since we've moved to this house on this street. What is going on? Clyde walks in on the phone to his mum. Ronnie says, Dad, don't worry, I was with Clyde. Sarah Jane comes in, also on the phone to someone, probably Geeta, saying, don't worry, they're at Ronnie's house. They're safe. It's okay. Haresh says, okay, sure, you were with Clyde, you two were together, but where? Ronnie says she just went round to Clyde's house before school to help with his homework last minute. I guess that she's willing to have him not believe it and assume that they were canoodling rather than letting him know the actual truth, which is fair enough. Haresh says, well, hey, an hour and a half going missing is like the weirdest thing possible, but we've got no real explanation for it. Nobody does. It happened to everyone. Look, take a look at the TV. They're talking about it. They're saying it happened to everyone. It's just a really weird moment for humanity, I guess. We'll have to chalk that up to being utterly bizarre. Okay, I guess so. Sorry, Sarah Jane, for having put you out, getting you to go out and search for the kids as well. She says it's no bother. She goes to take Clyde back home. Ronnie tells the rest she's going to have to go and get ready for school now. And he says, okay, I've got no idea what you're seeing, Clyde, by the way. Now, I'd imagine if humanity just lost an hour and a half, they might cancel school that day. But I guess not. Sometime later, presumably after school, in the attic, Sarah Jane says that the official records that Mr. Smith, on the official records, Mr. Smith has fixed it so that Gavin is moved to stay with other relatives in Australia. I imagine the aunt and uncle must have also been aliens. They're just aliens who didn't particularly care for him, because otherwise how would you fix it for the aunt and uncle if they were human? But then why would he be left with humans? But then the humans wouldn't know that he was their nephew because he'd be from an alien family. I don't know. A lot of questions that I guess aren't really our problem to deal with. But Mrs. Smith is just going to take care of it, okay? We'll just have to put our faith in Mrs. Smith. Clyde and Rani thanks Sarah Jane for giving them the skills to deal with everything. She says if she hadn't brought them in, then they wouldn't have been in danger and they wouldn't have needed to learn all these skills. Sure, but the entire human race would have been trapped in a subdimension, so it's a pretty good thing that you did bring them in, hey? Sarah Jane says that, like, okay, fine, but just if all of this ends one day, I don't want you to end up how I was, very alone for so long. And Ronnie says, well, look, we experienced true loneliness this morning, so we'll probably be able to deal with it. Sarah Jane goes off to order them some pizza for saving the day, and they both look at each other and they say, well, we aren't really alone though, we've got each other. This would, if they were going to kiss, this is the place that you put it. But they just refer to each other as my lord and my ladyship again. And man, the burn is slow. It is the slowest of burns. But I'm invested. It's such a shame we never get there, but, you know, we couldn't. It was just how it worked out. We couldn't in the end. And then we roll credits. And as I said, this series has just been really good. That was a great sci-fi story. I really enjoyed it. I recommend you go and watch it. I'm very happy to be watching these back again because even without the podcast, I just like watching these episodes. And then, of course, after we've rolled the credits, we get our next time. But before next time, these notes are out of order on my sheet, but I'm going to skip to the last note on the sheet that says, I'm just tacking this onto the end, but you know how I was talking about Mission 2110? After I wrote all these notes, I was talking to a friend of the podcast, the same one that I mentioned earlier, and he remembered a couple of robots in the Doctor Who episode Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, Series 7, I think Series 7, Episode 2. I remember that one. I remember someone asking me at school if I'd watched that episode, and I had no idea that they were a fan of Doctor Who either. So that was quite nice. But anyway, I'd completely forgotten that there were even robots in that episode. But I did a quick little Google search, and I came across a tweet that says that the robots in that episode were made for Mission 2110. And I don't even need to find a source from someone who worked on that episode confirming that or whatever. I can just see it with my eyes. They are exactly the same robots, just repainted. So, while the Mission 2110 robots were not in the empty planet, they did make their way into the Whoniverse after all, which is quite neat. And next time, oh, that's another great sci-fi story. Now, I haven't watched it back yet. I don't want to overhype it, but it is kind of the one that made me want to do this whole podcast in the first place, because there's a very specific point in particular that I want to nerd out about. I'm very excited, so look out for the captain, and I hope you join me then.